Hi guys, this is John Edward Willie, and I am curious about how you in particular wake up in the morning. In other words, are there a set of rituals or principles that you follow in order to ensure that you're able to wake up refreshed and ready to go the next day? I guess I should ask, are you a morning person at all? Or are you a so-called night person? Or do you think that there's a difference between being a night person and a morning person? Most people assume there is. I have become a morning person over time, and it blows my mind. I never would have thought that I would be a morning person. I was the perennial archetypal figure of the night. I had been into music and art and philosophy for so long that I sort of really assumed that my time of day was late night. And so later on, when I started working the nightlife, like working in bars and clubs and stuff, I really felt like I'd found my place in this world. And I really loved coming home at like 5 or 6 in the morning every night and sort of seeing people who were getting ready for their day or going out to work, and sort of giggling to myself, realizing that I had sort of escaped the day life. I'd sort of been able to avoid the kind of feelings and expectations and what to me for the longest time was like this horrible feeling, this sick feeling that I would have if I had to be up in the morning and I had to be out in the daylight. I know that sounds odd, but I just mean to express the fact that I was absolutely convinced that I was a night person, and I would come awake, especially after like 11 p.m. or 1 a.m. But the thing is that I'm now a morning person, and partially it's intentional, but partially it's a natural reflection of something that isn't really about who I am, but about what I value, because my values have shifted. Whereas I once lived in a world where I almost had no direction at all, no principle at all, effectively a life of chaos, has been organized now by the sun. And what I mean by that is that the sun is a metaphor for living and for life. And it's not as if people at night were not alive, because obviously they are, and there's quite a bit that gets done. But there's a sense in which maybe some of you who live at night are like I am, and you're secretly a morning person. And my life has changed in a physical sense since I started waking up at a certain time every day and started valuing deep sleep at night, and started thinking about what it would mean to work with the day as it is. I sort of realize as I'm saying this that I can't exactly recall all the reasons why I made this flip. So I guess in my future videos, that's precisely what I want to go about talking about, how it is that I made this kind of shift from being a morning person to being a night person. I realize I'm not being as clear as I could be. It's interesting because back in the day, I would have stopped this recording and started over, sort of encountering this difficulty, which is that I'm sort of stumbling in my speech, sort of hesitating because I'm not quite sure what I'm saying. When I started this recording this morning, I was very clear about the fact that I was going to speak about why it is that I wake up in the morning and what kind of things allow me to wake up in the morning feeling like someone that I never would have imagined I would feel I was before, which is a morning person. That was sort of like my intent. And what I find is that I can't exactly explain it to you. Maybe there's a sense in which it is a natural thing for some of us, but I do think that there's also quite a bit that can be said. And I don't mean to be too obscure about it, but I mean to raise the question of not only like what kind of things are there that you might do in the morning or at night to help yourself wake up better, Like, what kind of things do you do in terms of not having blue light when you're in bed, or maybe waking up at the same time, or maybe doing what I do, which is not drinking coffee for like the first 45 minutes after waking up, and sort of going on a walk immediately after waking up, before coffee, before anything. Going on like a 20-30 minute walk allows me to wake up like significantly. But the thing is, what I'm trying to say is that it's not just about these things, it's also about, what do you think about the daylight? What do you think about the nighttime? As sort of representing different trajectories or values in us in terms of who we are. And of course, as I said, I'm hesitating because I'm not even sure exactly how to answer this question. And yet I feel as if I were, in the way that I live, answering this question. But I suppose what I want to hear is feedback from others regarding what they think about waking up in the morning and whether or not it's worth it. Because one thing that sort of goes along with being a morning person is waking up and being super excited about life, about I almost tripped just now, is being super excited about what you're doing. Because that's what I mean to convey, is that it is possible to wake up and feel very focused, to feel very excited about what you're doing, and to feel very, very chill at the same time. I never would have thought that I would be in a position where I feel that way. And I wake up and I'm ready to study, and I'm ready to write, and I'm ready to at least think about how I'm going to produce this thing that I call Circle 8. And so I suppose that I'm sort of wondering how it is that I ended up in a position where I would want to do all of this. And I realize that it sort of comes out of this morning routine that I'm hoping to make more explicit as I go along. And yet I can only be so explicit before I start wondering about my invisible interlocutors, which are you, my 8 subscribers, or hopefully more in the future. But I would hope to generate a kind of dialogue wherein I can get feedback that helps me think more clearly about what it is that I'm already doing. And I just woke up literally like 30 minutes ago, and so you have to forgive me for being a bit jumbled in the way that I'm speaking. I'd like to make those super clear, super crisp, sort of like almost like clinical videos where people just convey information quickly and entertainingly and then leave you, the listener, alone. I sort of get lost in my own thoughts, and I think that on a certain level, as I learn how to do that in a way that's more helpful or more conducive to generating unexpected insights, I think that I will grow as a content producer. So you can't do anything except be what you are. And so that's precisely what I'm attempting to do in these kind of videos. And so my question is, what is it that you do to wake up in the morning or to go to bed at night, in a very technical sense? Because the things that I do are really boring, and yet at the same time they could potentially be very helpful to anyone that is wanting to maybe get on that path to sort of learn tools and techniques so that they themselves can maybe take advantage of who they really are. And I think in future videos there's a lot that could be said about working the nightlife, about working at night, and there's a lot that could be said about working during the day. But I sort of see these as fundamental things in our life that make us who we are. And I wasn't planning on making this video. It just arises as an attempt to triangulate specific practical things that we can do to improve the quality of our lives. Because that is a fundamental philosophical question that kind of gets overlooked, which is, what is the good life? How do we live a good life? And so it might seem ridiculous to think about awakening in the morning, and yet this itself is crucially related to orienting ourselves towards life itself. And I think that developing an active state of mind as opposed to being passive is vital in deepening your experience of life and enriching, deepening the quality of your life, the feelings that you have, the very sense that you have in being alive. And so waking up is waking up the right way, waking up beautifully is fundamental in living, or at least pursuing this kind of good life. And that's what I'm interested in, is the question of how to live. How do we live? What is life? And that in itself is not merely a technical question. It gives way to a number of issues that we would sometimes prefer to not think about. But I think that when we do think about them and have the courage to think more fully about these questions that we overlook, that we end up unexpectedly tapping in to the secret parts of ourself. And so I'm sorry for being so ethereal and also for being not quite so clear, but I am attempting to not only work through the particular questions of how I can live in a way where I'm really living, but also how can I think about life in a way that escapes the reductive traps of other people, that escapes the reductive traps of other people's thinking about how you're supposed to live, how you're supposed to think about things like the daylight. And I'm throwing this video out there as really one of my more obscure videos, even though this is an explicit attempt to talk about waking up and how we can learn how to sleep and wake in a way that is fully human. And yet I'm not so sure what I'm saying. So I guess this is really a question. Maybe you as the listener can help me figure out what am I trying to say. And maybe you can also offer your advice in terms of how you have turned your life towards the light. And I mean that in a secular way, but I mean, if you do love life, if you really love life, it's not something you choose to do really, or you can force to happen. It just sort of happens where you discover that you love your life, and then you might do some reverse engineering to figure out how you got into that position of loving your life. So I guess that is my question that I'm sort of uncovering here, is how does one love their life? And if you know, you should let me know, because we can exchange information, we can exchange ideas, we can build upon this and maybe surprise both of ourselves. I'm John Edward Willie, and I have no idea what I'm saying, but I'm trying my best to make a video about simply waking up in the morning and what that means to me while in the act of waking up in the morning and having really almost no control over my own mind, you know. But so be it. I love you guys, and I hope you have a good day.